Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our Green Jobs Now panel. We have 40 minutes, so I'm not going to introduce each person individually. You'll get a sense of who they are when you hear them speak, and maybe afterwards, if you guys want to say hi, we'll be outside. Some of us. Matt, not you. Okay. I'm Ramona Schindelheim. I will introduce myself. I'm the editor-in-chief of WorkingNation. We're a nonprofit news organization, and we are in the business of telling stories about solutions, today's future work issues, and also pointing out opportunities where we think there is growth for people in good family-sustaining careers. And one of the things that we have been thinking about over the last year is that with the talk about the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, that there's an opportunity for massive job growth. So we, in January, started a new project called Green Jobs Now, and we're taking a state-by-state look at the opportunities and how you get them, how you get the skills you need, how you get the education. And we partnered with MC Burning Glass on this project, and we've put out 5 states, I believe now, and we have 5 more that are coming, so you can find those at workingnation.com. And so today we want to talk about some of those opportunities, what the challenges are, but mostly which direction we're going in. And so first I want to get Matt Sigelman up here to talk to us a little bit about the green economy and what that means. And one of the things that MC Burning Glass has pointed out in the research is that there is expected to be 5.7% growth nationally in this economy over the next 5 years. So green jobs in sectors across the country. So the first question I would like Matt to explain is, for those of you who don't know, what is a green job? What are we talking about when we say green job?
So I love that we're asking that question, and first of all, just want to thank WorkingNation for all of your work to bring focus to this as an opportunity area in the economy. The world of green jobs is broad and precisely. Am I supposed to turn this on? Or?
I just want to make sure.
Oh, look at that. Maybe that's.
There you go. Make sure your mics are on.
Okay. or it just shows that I'm green at using a microphone.
A lifelong learner.
A lifelong learner. I'm acquiring new skills at ASU+GSV. Look, a green job has I think one of the things that we've struggled with today is that there's an impression that people have of a green job as being a job which is involved exclusively in a set of environmental technologies or the like. And that is certainly part of the green economy. But through our research together, what we've come to realize is that the green economy actually has a much broader set of facets, and as a result represents a bigger space of opportunity in the economy today. So we think about a set of core green jobs that are in things like environmental engineering, waste management and remediation, in natural resource conservation, in alternative energy and the like. And there's a significant core of those jobs. And we think that over the next 5 years, there could be about 3.6 million a job that open in that sort of core green field. But this is what makes the question such an interesting one. Because there's a set of jobs that are in those sectors we call core green jobs, but then there's a set of jobs that are green enabled. In other words, ones which were green enabling, I should say, first. So sets of jobs that are key to the success and the spread and the utilization of green technologies, but which themselves are not green. So take, for example, a loan officer. Increasingly, we need to have project financing around green jobs, but that doesn't mean, is that loan officer installing solar panels? She's not. But is her work critical, and it's her ability to not only do her job as she's always done her job critical, but it's also important for her to be able to understand and measure green projects, right? We then talk about further, if you think about this as a set of concentric circles, there's a set of jobs which are green enabled. We start to see some technologies Why aren't you guys like celebrating like that?
They really liked your answer. Yeah.
But we also then have a set of jobs which, finally, it's sort of the outer ring, is the sets of jobs that are leveraging green skills more broadly. And I think when we start to take that full expansive definition, you're talking about 36 million jobs, about 22.5% of the workforce, which ultimately will be in one of those rings, either green, green-enabled, green-enabling, or which leverage green skills.
Yeah, and Joan, that's a good segue into the size of this green economy. When you look at it in this kind of in this perspective, it's huge. It's bigger than Walmart.
Yeah, I mean, that's a burning glass number. It's 25% more in terms of, I think it was $650 billion, 25% more than Walmart. And, you know, what we love about telling the stories at WorkingNation is how inspirational it is that people at any level of education can get a job that actually benefits the environment. We have seen this. We've heard from these people in the interviews from a installation person in Philadelphia who didn't realize that what they were putting into the building was energy efficient and it was good for the environment. You're literally seeing these people light up when they recognize that the job that they're doing, the career that they're in, is actually positively affecting the environment. We also have, you know, a fourth-generation rice farmer who did go to college but brought it back to Arkansas to advance his farm and use his skills out of college to talk about water conservation and change his family business. So, you know, what we like to do is tell the stories because we all know that these generations, the younger generation is interested in the environment, they're interested in doing good. So if you're coming out of school and you're good at math and you want to be an accountant, you know, we've talked about this, Matt and Ramona and I, many times. These businesses that are positively affecting the environment, they need accountants. You know, they need HR directors. They need people that are in these jobs using their skills to build a career in order to build the business and to build the economy. So it's a pretty exciting project.
Yeah. So Governor Ritter in Colorado, you guys are ahead of the game. You guys have been really looking at the connection between the economy, clean economy, and jobs for a long time. And according to our research, because we reported on Colorado, whereas the national average is 10.7%, the growth in Colorado, because of the infrastructure you have in place, it's going to, you and your predecessors and your antecessors? What's the word after? Successors. There we go. I'm going to have to go back and get my dictionary. But it's going to be 10.3%. And something Joan just said reminded me of a conversation I had with you. People have skills in place now that can be used in jobs that are green. Construction work is something we've discussed. So talk a little bit about what you guys have been doing in Colorado to kind of bring the economies together.
I'm happy to do that. I will say that we work with states around the country, and so while Colorado is leading, there are a lot of states that I think are thinking about the same way. And so part of it is that we have combined our energy policy with climate policy, and also our transportation policy, our built environment policy in Colorado, so that, you know, when people hear green jobs, I think you were saying, Matt, you know, some folks think solar, wind, when really, if you think about the next 15 years and what we have to do, it's actually going to revolutionize many sectors. So it'll be the energy sector, the built environment, the industrial sector, the ag sector. You're talking about a rice farmer. Imagine if that rice farmer is also able to trade on a carbon market because there's now carbon credits that he can sell to people who are still out there polluting. So what we have done, I think, is put a policy structure in place that was favorable to this worker transition. Interesting, we're still a fossil fuel state, and we've seen, you know, coal take the big dive, but there's still oil and gas there. It's just that the real big push, and it's really a massive transition in Colorado and around the country. If you think about the next 10 years and an 85% reduction in emission by all of these utilities, or construction companies that are involved in energy efficiency retrofits, even in some of the poorest places in Colorado. It's all part of this policy structure of saying we want to bring everybody along, but we have to do this because of emissions, and we've got a 50% cut by 2030 that aligns with the Paris Accords, but so do 25 other states. So even states that might be behind Colorado or California or New York, they've got to come along, and they will be part of what I would call even a revolution of sorts because of how massive the transition is across the board.
It's a combination too. So you're talking about the environment, the climate, the economy, and then education is a key component in all of this to make sure people understand where the jobs are, but how to get them. And Frank, I know that is a conversation that this is what you're passionate about, so.
Sure, so I mean, it's nice to be with you all. But I think building on that transformation, that longer transformation, the gaps are already in the workforce, whether in many of the sectors that we're talking about. It's already there. It's going to widen. The gap is going to widen because of the climate drivers. The speed at which these transformations, whether it's technology, transportation, industry, land, energy, agriculture, all of those are going to be transforming, and that unless that gap narrows, the capacity to actually do that work is going to require some very specific educational interventions, because we have to unlock the education sector to really do the full work here. But it's not just the education sector, because it's also families, because the support for programs where families are saying, yes, I want my son or daughter to go into a career and technical dual enrollment program instead of higher education, is going to require different work. It needs a comprehensive all of society push to actually close those gaps and build the capacity to do the work. We're seeing this across the country now, but it's too episodic and too disconnected. And so at the work at the federal level, we're looking at trying to figure out to play what we have to do to support that work across the country. I'll just also note, as we talk about green jobs now, we also have to lay the foundation for green jobs of the future now, but also I'm focused on the adaptation side. And that also is, it's not, you wouldn't call it green jobs, but it's a workforce that complements the goals of states and cities across the nation that must be in the mix. And then, but I'm really excited to have this conversation. Hopefully we can keep it going beyond today, because it needs focus.
Agreed. And Ferg, again, playing off on all of this we're talking about, it's not just the government that needs to be involved. Private sector is getting involved in helping educate people for those jobs today and for the future. And in Los Angeles, you've run some development programs showing women how to fix EV chargers. That's a technology we didn't even think about. It's a green technology, and now there is this program that will train people in their neighborhood. I'd love to hear about that very specific program, but then your bigger thoughts, and then we'll open up the conversation a little bit more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ramona. And everything that's been said on this panel so far completely resonates with me. And it's of utmost importance that we really have a coordinated delivery system to ensure that individuals from all walks of life, from BIPOC communities, are engaged at what we call at LACI, every clean tech stage. So whether it's ideation, workforce, or deployment, folks need to be brought to the table. But in response to your question, Ramona, we've had the good fortune at LACI to launch over 5 different programs, and one in which was an all-women IT support course that prepared women to have CompTIA, ITIL, foundations, and other certifications to get into the IT space. So when we talk about the green enabling jobs or the green core jobs, these are what we call through-line jobs, because every single startup, every single company is going to need some type of IT infrastructure. And coming up in this fall, we're launching a South LA-based initiative to prepare women in South Los Angeles to operate work, commission, and troubleshoot EV charging stations. And so this is in collaboration with Charger Help, which is a tech company that created an app to help to deploy a workforce to repair broken charging stations, knowing that on average the downtime for these stations are pretty substantial, and about 30% of these charging stations are broken. And so with that being said, we're doing our best to be responsive and really kind of keeping our ears to the streets, as they say, to make sure that we're providing the right training necessary for folks to be able to get into this inclusive green economy.
A general question, or question for the panel. Do you think when people hear green jobs or green economy, there's a disconnect that they just don't understand what it means, or that they have an immediate response, whether it's yay or nay?
I would say when we set out to do this project, we actually had an internal conversation about how we use the word green. It can be incredibly polarizing. We've all discussed that. And WorkingNation, we always say jobs are not a Republican or a Democratic issue. They're an American issue. Well, there are plenty of companies that we have been dealing with and telling stories about that are doing amazing things and transferring their companies over and working to save the environment. But it has been difficult because there are a lot of people that shut it off when they hear the word green. They go in one direction.
I think the big enviros, were called the Big Greens, the Sierra Club, for instance, and they were sort of working to make it difficult for other things to happen, like, timber, mining interests, even big utilities. And so there developed over time a hostility towards something that was connoted as green. And so we established, actually, in Colorado, we like to call it clean. And we don't use the word green because clean just sits better with people because of this sort of history we've had of the division around things that were green. We had eco-terrorists, burn things up on Vail Mountain because they didn't like Vail's environmental policy. And that kind of thing was just really harmful to sort of the green movement.
So how do we bring everybody together then on this obvious mission that we have the opportunities out there? We need to get people educated on it. And maybe, Frank, this is, again, something that you have talked a lot about from the federal stance, but let's talk about it all across.
Well, but I think one of the easy first steps is the amount of growth and the salaries and the opportunities in this sector that are currently operating is massive, but it's invisible to most people. But then also when you couple that with the climate plans that communities like San Diego, California, and beyond have, they're pushing aggressive changes in these sectors, which means those opportunities that are right now are indicators of what could be. And so if you don't normalize that these are real possibilities, these are real opportunities, these are, and actually economically great jobs, and low cost from a debt perspective, often these jobs don't require 4-year degrees. They may require no degree or a 1-year technical certification at a community college, maybe an associate's degree, and you're in with a very high salary. Not all of them, but I don't think that we've done a great job of making a campaign about the need and also the existing already. It's just not, but unless we bring that full approach, I don't think we're going to close those gaps, and the capacity limits are going to limit the opportunity, not the climate goal, not the finance, not the technology, the capacity.
Yeah. And to your point, Frank, as I mentioned earlier, there's a preeminent need for us to have a coordinated delivery system. And what I mean by that is being intentional about starting with the end in mind and being able to create jobs and create green job pathways or clean pathways for individuals. And so at LACI, we're really excited. Toward the end of this year, we plan to launch what we call a regional consortium. And this is our regional effort to create 600,000 green jobs by 2050. And so at the table, we'll have academia, we'll have labor, we'll have CBOs, industry, and government, so that we're all working off of the clean or green job definition so that folks can be presented with opportunities articulation agreements can be developed that individuals, not only are they earning, but they're learning, but they're attaining college credits as well. And so while there's, a need for, state and federal coordination, we're starting with LA County region to make a difference in making sure that folks are presented with these opportunities.
What I really love about what you shared is the notion of having an underlying talent strategy. We a lot of times have sectoral strategies, whether for clean jobs, whether for other sectors. But the notion that underneath any kind of sectoral strategy, and certainly true for an emerging economy like green, that there needs to be a talent strategy, and a talent strategy needs a skill strategy, and that to develop any strategy requires coordination across K-12, across community college, across higher ed, and of course across employers and the employer community to say, okay, what is the talent that we're going to need? Not just how many jobs, not just a calculus of jobs, but a real plan about green skills, about green transitions, and how we make, because then what you can do is you've got everyone together with a single strategy, singing from a single hymnal, and it allows us to do two things at once, which is to see demand growth happen at the same time that supply growth happens. Otherwise, we wind up with significant disjoints.
I'll take it a little bit. This is a justice conversation. So if you think about where we built chemical manufacturing, where we built oil and gas refining, where we even built coal-fired furnaces, there are a lot of poor communities, and there's some real public health detriment to that. And so I think the thing, again, that Ferg was talking about is sit down with the end in mind, and one of the ends in mind have to be, how do we build this next phase of the economy in a way that's just to the people who have really borne the greatest burden to date of our manufacturing economy and of our energy economy. And so California, with AB 32, they actually have money that goes into marginalized communities. The Biden administration has a thing called Justice 40, where 40% of the benefit is supposed to go into frontline or marginalized communities. And I think that's a begin with the end in mind kind of thing. Now we'll see. We'll see how that actually works out, but for so long, we've neglected these communities in such a serious way in spite of them paying a lot of different costs for our building manufacturing and electric generation next to them. And so the thing that I think we need to do nationally is to have a mapping strategy, not unlike what I think we've done in Colorado and also in California, and then map that out and ask, okay, now how do we ensure that part of what we're doing, there are benefits that accrue there. So it's wealth, in part, wealth creation, job creation, workforce development, and education are all part of that strategy.
In Louisiana, some of the reporting we saw, they're building some cleaner blue hydrogen plants in an area where oil and refineries have really damaged the economy there, and now they're working with the community colleges along the Mississippi to help train these people. And one of the people that we talked to for a story was a 47-year-old security guard who has worked in Baton Rouge his whole life as a security guard, and he was working at one of these community colleges and then at a plant as a security guard, and he saw what they were doing, and he has now gone back to the community college to get his own associate's degree. So making a transition at 47, which I thought was great, but it is right there in that community. So I was thinking about in Colorado, coal workers, there's this fear that clean is going to equal no job for people. How do you address that, and how do you get everybody on board with you to understand that?
So I have a project with my center that I run at CSU with coal-dependent communities in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. And we've done all these webinars where people have attended the webinars and we're trying to help them. But we're working directly in Craig, Colorado. And the answer is it's really difficult. In part because they're the highest paid workers in the community, people who work in coal mines and even at coal-fired generation. They've been there 4 generations. there are multiple generations in a family that have been there, and so it's not easy. You can't come in and say, we'd like to teach you how to be a coder and move to the Front Range. And so there's some strategies. We're looking at developing some renewables in that area. We're also looking at the possibility of a hydrogen hub in 4 states, and hopefully some of those hydrogen research places will be with coal. In Wyoming, Bill Gates is building a nuclear plant where there used to be a coal-fired facility. So, you know, that may not strike people as green. It is clean. It's carbon-free, and the fact that they're doing it in a coal-fired community is to basically say there is some possibility for economic development transition. It may not seem like everybody's idea of, you know, a green economy, but I think it could make a big difference to Kimmer or Wyoming.
And there is a salary boost that we've seen, Matt, on all of these jobs. There's some of the jobs, depending on the state, because depending on what the average salary is, they can be $2,000, you know, a year more on some of these clean jobs, or $4,000 a year more. So that seems like a factor that we should be sharing with everybody, that this is a pathway toward a family-sustaining career.
Yeah, and to that point, Ramona, what we found in a green jobs report in LA County, green jobs pay about 12% higher than the LA County average. And in addition to that, for every $1 million that's invested, it can create 7.5 full-time jobs. And for the zero-emission transportation sector, for every $1 million that's invested, yields 15 jobs. And so we know dollar for dollar, the green jobs can create more, you know, opportunity. And so there's definitely an uptick. There definitely is a lot of upside, you know, to transitioning folks into the green economy.
And Frank, you talk a lot about young people learning about this. What are some of the challenges and some of the successes that you've seen to get this into the curriculum and to become part of our language every day?
So one of my favorite stories about this is that my best question I was ever asked by anybody, and maybe we'll get to questions here, but we'll see, was a 7th grader. We were doing a climate change talk. I was brought in to talk about climate change, and he was like, I think I get climate change, but the question I want to know is, are all the jobs going to change? So I just want you to think about that for a second. 7th grade. I used to be a 7th grade teacher. They're beginning to think about their future. They're beginning to think about their preparations. They're beginning to think about, what do I want to do and what difference I want to be part of. But all too often, those 7th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, when they're beginning to think about career pathways, all too often what we're talking about is not happening with them. And so if we don't have a more comprehensive approach to work with the full pathway, all the way down to at least 5th grade, then they're going to spend a lot of time preparing for the wrong job. They misunderstand the future. If they misunderstand the future, I've heard numerous times a junior in college go, wait a minute, they're in a climate change class finally. You mean to tell me this is climate change? We just had the IPCC Working Group 3 report come out yesterday. Yeah. Incredibly strong signal. But when you're thinking about that signal relative to a 7th grader or the educators who are supporting them, they don't have the resources, they don't understand what we just been talking about. And if they don't understand it, they can't help nurture pathways and all those steps that they take, which courses they take, which majors they take, which internships they take. They need to prepare for that future, the one we've been talking about, not the one that they know based on everything else, that is the status quo. Status quo is no longer going to be an indicator of the future because of a lot of different drivers that we've talked about here. So we need a more comprehensive approach, and far too often young people are not getting the signal. They're getting the signal too late, and the programs that support them are not focused on the right parts of this equation. There are places where this is happening, and there's pockets, and those pockets need to be transferred to other places, and we're in one of those pockets right here in San Diego. But that's just beginning. But we need a full all-of-society approach, and it's just starting to get it articulated. What John Doerr talked about yesterday, I'm really interested to see if it's in that book. I think there's probably some more details that are needed, but we'll see. But it's a critical question. Thank you.
I think it's also, to add on to that, we always talk about how the solutions are local. I love what you said, Bill, about the states that you're working with, because these states can learn from each other. One of the reasons that we did Green Jobs now the way that we did it state by state is the conversation you're having with that 7th grader is different in Louisiana than it is in Colorado. And so it makes it that much more difficult for educators. How do we let them know what is happening in our state? How do we let them know at that age what types of skills you need? So it does change state to state and in regions, and it gives opportunities for people like former Governor Ritter, the opportunity to build something, bring it to other states and say, this can be replicated, get this community college involved. But we completely agree with you, the younger the better, because what we're hearing back at WorkingNation is younger and younger asking that question. What do I need to know? And we're also saying you don't have to move out of your state to have a job that is good for the environment.
But there's another critical piece, is that at a state level, you have one level of action, but sub-states, all too often, many of the communities, counties, cities, are much farther ahead of the states, including Louisiana. And so those communities, you can begin moving and get a foothold as you move up to the state level and then beyond.
I want to just sort of add to that, but also say this, that as we think about how we affect those kinds of transitions, it's not only a place-based, and I'm really glad Joan brought that up, in a question, but it's also a time-based one. Frank was describing before, I think about that 7th grader, and it's a wonderful question. For many 7th graders, if they go on to college, that's 10 years before they're actually going to be in the workforce. And the reality is in a fast emerging economy with so many nuances, so many geographic nuances, but also so many technology-driven dependencies, nobody has the perfect crystal ball. The reality is nobody's got the answer to that 7th grader's question. So on the one hand, we need to start early, but I think we also need to really think about not just green jobs, which will change, but green skills, because that gives us a building block. It gives us a way to help prepare people, whether they be in 7th grade, whether they be in the middle of their careers, to be able to make transitions over time, to be able to make steps in a way that is progressive, that is not asking people to leap tall buildings in a single bound, but instead is something that is achievable. And so I think when we can break down the green economy into a set of green skills, we can see those transitions into green, across green, from the carbon economy into green as being concatenations of skills that people can pick up over time.
So one of the things I think is difficult about that, I totally agree, but skill-based learning happened, 35, 40, 45 years ago with unions involved in a much deeper way than they are now. And so I'm fascinated by what the role of unions are versus technical schools, trade schools, community colleges. If you do not hear Joe Biden say jobs without putting union before it, and yet the union jobs have largely gone away in many places where states were sort of hostile to unions. We are kind of in the mix in Colorado as a purple state. It's been politicized, and we have to do this, and we have to do it pretty quickly, right? This transition has to happen pretty quickly, and the question becomes, where are we going to rely? And I think you said it, kind of all of the above kind of thing, and we need to have those kinds of fora that allow us to be with community colleges, with trade schools, with technical schools, with unions, and say, how do we do this, and how do we bring everybody along? Because there are places in this country where unions have not been hospitable to people of color. And, they're union halls that don't have a lot of people of color in them, and we want to make this transition equitable. We have to change that formula.
And I'm glad you brought up, organized labor. I think to your point, Governor, I think, look, organized labor, just like a range of other mechanisms, can be tremendous forces for mobility. The key question is, what's the infrastructure for people acquiring mobility, for being able to understand what are next steps and what are the skills that get you there? And I think unions can certainly play a significant part in helping make sure that their membership can see not only to better pay and better benefits for the roles they're in today, but what are those next roles. But I think community colleges play a significant role. And let's not forget employers, because we need to create the supply that demand requires. And so employers who expect just to be able to acquire that talent on the spot market, those days went away with the start of the pandemic and all the talent shortages that we're seeing today. And I think the silver lining of that dark cloud is that employers are starting to recognize that they need to build the supply that they need, and they need to drive the awareness in order to build, to have a supply that they can bring along.
As they bring new technology into the workplace, they can't expect people to just show up and know how to do it. So they have to be a part of that solution. So we only have a couple more minutes, and I would love everyone to give me just kind of a final thought on this subject. I'm going to start with Frank, move down, and Joan, I'm going to let you end it.
So
Yeah.
what I'm keenly interested in here is, after this panel, what's next? Because we've been. If I go back to what Sunrun said in that chair where you are, Ferg, yesterday, they're having major gaps in who they can hire. But the comprehensive approach that we need to have, whether at a community scale or a national scale, somewhere between all of them, I've been incredibly interested to see how do we get a much more coordinated strategy. And so listening to all these conversations across this panel and then beyond later today, I definitely think we need a plan if we're going to take this conversation and actually close the gap and meet our climate targets and also provide good paying jobs to people. But we don't have a plan right now. We need one.
Governor?
So I'd say if you take the 5 biggest emitters, energy, the transportation sector, the built environment, industry, and agriculture, in that order. And if you look at what needs to happen in order for us to really do what we need to do as the United States of America, curbing our emissions, this massive, massive transition. We can see it in the utility sector where you have all these companies that have these major ambitions to curb their emissions by 80 or 85% by 2030, 2035. That's pretty quickly. The transportation sector, Ford and GM say they're not going to build an internal combustion engine after 2035. No more ICEs after 2035. So that's just 2 examples. The other sectors are harder to decarbonize, but this is this really big thing. So having a discussion that doesn't confine green to something small, but expands the idea of what the workforce could and should look like in 2035 for us to solve this really big problem, I think that's what I appreciate about WorkingNation taking this on. So thank you.
Ferg?
I'll just mention this. There's a word that's derived from Ghana called Sankofa. It's basically looking backwards to spring forward. And when we talk about green jobs, it may be a new emerging word or phrase or concept, but there's nothing new under the sun. And so what I would employ and encourage everyone is to look at what has been done in the past so that we can spring forward. There are models out here that deserve a lot of attention and a good look at, especially when we talk about coordinated delivery systems. Governor Ritter, what you've done in Colorado with P-TECH and what Job Corps has been doing historically around applied academics is a great opportunity and way for folks to have not only skills-based training, but to move into the skilled industry, into the skilled industry, especially around green jobs. And so let's just evaluate what we've done so that we won't undo all the work that we've done now so that we can continue to move forward.
And Matt?
I want to go back to what Joan shared before so well, this idea that jobs are not a Democrat issue or Republican issue, but they're an American issue. And so I think this notion, we were talking before about the polarization of green, and the answer to that is understanding opportunity. And I think opportunity is what gets us above politics. And so when I think about, on the one hand, understanding the nature of this opportunity, the scale of this opportunity, and the dynamics of this opportunity, I think that's very exciting. What it also allows us to do, when we really understand what this economy is and can be, we can understand the talent that's going to be required in a way that lets us work backwards and say, what are the talent communities we can bring along? Governor brought up before the question of equity in this space. Who are the talent communities who've been left behind? Who are the talent communities who need to be part of this? And what's the skill bridge that allows us to get there? When we address this, this has tremendous implications, not just for individuals, but for our competitiveness as a country.
And I'm going to steal 30 seconds to let Joan kind of sum up what we've been talking about here on our website and in our videos and our articles about WorkingNation and what we're looking forward to.
Sure. So if you turn on your television and watch the news, there's a lot of things you're not going to see. We all know that. But we do hear about economic recovery. We hear about employment recovery now, a lot of conversations about the Great Resignation and all of these things. What we really believe is that when people talk about the environment, sometimes it becomes a debate automatically. It becomes very negative. Well, what we're hearing up here is a lot of great solutions, a lot of forward thinking. And so we're talking about environmental recovery that also does support economic recovery. It's all a part of the same thing. But I would say one of the challenges and one of the opportunities that we have at WorkingNation, and we're loving it, doing it state by state, is to point to the solutions, to point to the government leaders, the business leaders, the training programs, and all of these things that are doing the right thing, because people are hungry for this information. We can tell you that. Our experience at WorkingNation is people are hungry for it. They're not seeing this on the news. So how do we get this to our 7th graders? How do we get this to our leaders and expand on this topic? Because we have to, for both the environment and our economy.
I want to thank my great panel. I think you guys brought some really great points. And so let's give it a round of applause. Yeah. And I would also like to thank everybody here for coming in and listening to this important conversation. We'll be out in the hall, some of us, if you want to ask any questions. We're going to move so the next panel can come in.